Morning, everybody. That's just to remind you, we are recording this, so it will be available on YouTube later on, and you can access it through the Parent Foundation website as well, for all those who can't join us this morning. My name is Tim Loughton. I chair the All-Party Parliamentary Group for 1001 Days, and this morning's meeting is a joint meeting with the All-Party Group for Infant Feeding, and I hope that Alison, Thewliss, the chair of that All-Party Group, is going to be joining us at some stage this morning as well. Just to put this into context, this is the second in a series of meetings that the All-Party 1001 Days Group has been holding, focusing on family hubs and the first 1001 days. We had our first meeting of this series in February, which covered midwives and health visitors and family hubs. We've got this meeting today, which is about infant feeding and family hubs, and then we've got a third meeting in the series in June, which is going to look at mental health and family hubs. Now, those of you who've been part of this before will know all about the Best Start in Life vision, about families being able to access midwifery, health visiting, infant feeding, mental health support, and other services within family hubs. Money was allocated in last year's spending review, and 75 areas have now been selected for receiving that Start for Life funding and developing their family hubs. So this whole program is very much up and running. And so today what we want to do is to focus on what can be done to support infant feeding in family hubs and some of the opportunities and challenges which we're facing there. Now, we were hoping to have civil servants from the Department for Education and Department for Health and Social Care who, alas, have pulled out at the last moment because they don't feel prepared enough. But Sally Hogg from the Parent Infant Foundation is stepping in as ever and has got some slides to present at the beginning as well. And then we've got some really excellent speakers from UNICEF, from a family hub in Hamlets, a breastfeeding support service in the family hub in Doncaster, and also the Henry service from Waltham Forest. So this is very much about looking at existing good practice and seeing what is happening in certain parts of the country, and then seeing how we can scale that up and roll it out to all parts of the country as well. I see we've been joined, Alison Thewliss, welcome, who chairs the infant feeding group. I think the idea is I'm going to hand over to Sally now. We'll go through the speakers, and then Alison, you're going to bring everything to a very efficient conclusion at the end. Just if we go on until 11, just a word of warning, I've got to be at an event at 11, so I may duck out slightly early if we're still going at that stage, but Alison will, of course, take over for the end bit. So I think that is everything. Just remind everybody, we are being recorded. You will be able to see the playback of this for those who weren't able to join us this morning. We're going to have the 4 presentations, and then we will have questions and a discussion at the end of that. And if you can use the Q&A facility, then Sally and Alison and I will try and juggle those questions and get everybody in and cover as much as possible. So without further ado, if everybody's in the right meeting, we will carry on, and I'll hand over first to Sally to do those introductions. Sally Hogg.
Thank you very much, Tim. Good morning, everybody. So, as Tim said, we were thrilled originally to have both Department for Education and Department for Health officials coming, but sadly both have pulled out at the last minute. So I have done some very last minute slides just to set the context for today. And I need to qualify this by the fact that I am neither an infant feeding specialist nor a civil servant. But I hopefully can still add some useful context before our amazing panel of speakers. So you should hope to see my slides there. I thought I would start by just describing a little bit about why this matters. So we know that we are not in a great state in this country around infant feeding and nutrition. and I've just got a few kind of stats and facts to share with you about that. So 48% of mothers breastfeed their baby at 6 to 8 weeks in England. That's a stat from the Start for Life report itself. As I said, I'm not an expert, but talking to experts in this area about what the kind of current issues are, there are a number of feeding practices which science and guidance tells us are not the best way to start our children's nutrition and diet practices for life, and yet which are increasingly prevalent in this country around not just the drop-off rates for breastfeeding, but the initiation of complementary feeding too early, and a widespread reliance on commercially produced baby foods, on snacks and treats, and unnecessary growing up in toddler milks. And that all of that contributes to the fact that we have increasing child obesity. So when we look at what's going on for our 4 and 5 year olds, there is increasing number of children living with obesity in this country, and that is particularly prevalent, as this graph shows, amongst our most deprived children. So more than 20% of reception children in the most deprived areas of England are living with obesity by the age of 4 or 5, and we know that continues to rise throughout childhood. And this is a problem, as many issues around this age group, that has been much exacerbated by the pandemic. So this is a really shocking graph from the National Child Measurement Programme in England, which shows those already high levels of children who are living with obesity or who are overweight, absolutely rocketing, that huge tick up during the pandemic. So a real need to kind of mobilise and do everything that we can to make sure that the infants, babies, young children are getting the best start in life through supporting infant feeding. So in terms of the policy context, specifically around the first 1,001 days, obviously there has been work around supporting infant feeding in government policy for many, many years. But we saw this included as part of the Start for Life vision, which was the vision that Dame Andrea Leadsom worked with civil servants and experts and others to produce last year, and which was set out as government policy in April 2021. And that had a vision of infant feeding support as one of the core components of this Start for Life offer, which should be available for all families wherever they are in England for the first 1,001 days. So that Start for Life offer includes, as Tim said, health visiting, midwifery, infant feeding, mental health, by which they mean both infant and parental mental health, send and safeguarding support. And this is what it described in terms of the breastfeeding and infant feeding part of that. So support for breastfeeding, advice and early diagnosis of issues, and help with formula feeding where that's most appropriate. And it specifically mentions support groups and peer networks as part of the offer. So that was set out as a vision. And then we saw in October some fantastic funding in the spending review to start to implement some of that in 75 local areas in England. And I just screenshotted a bit from the government announcement here, which shows how that 300 million is broken down. So 100 million of it for parent-infant mental health, 82 million for a network of family hubs, which are really the kind of place in which many of these other services will be offered, and 50 million of it to support to establish breastfeeding support services. So that was announced in October with the funding from the financial year that's just begun and for 3 years that follows. At the start of this month, on the 2nd of April, the government announced 75 pre-selected areas. So of the 150 or so local authorities in England, they selected half of them based on 2 measures. The first one was the APPG, which is a measure of deprivation, but they also kind of moderated that by looking at making sure there was a mix of different local authorities across rural and urban. So the 75 areas, pre-selected areas, have been announced, but we don't know yet how or when the funding will be distributed. What those areas need to do to move from being pre-selected to being actually selected, and maybe some of them won't be selected and there'll be other local authorities that end up getting some of the money, and most importantly, what actually they will be expected to deliver in terms of family hubs, in terms of feeding support, and in terms of the other aspects of this offer. And that's what the civil servants are currently discussing. So there are a number of webinars and focus groups happening with those 75 pre-selected areas and other organisations like the LGA and others at the moment to try and really firm up what it is. And it's because those discussions are ongoing that the civil servants didn't feel able to come today. This again is a screenshot from what government has said that just kind of reinforces that. So in the coming months, from, you know, we're now in April, and the money is available. It was available from April in terms of the government departments having it, but they are still working out exactly how it's going to be split between those 75 areas and exactly what is going to be required. What we do understand is that they're working on the basis of setting out some minimum requirements in each of the areas of the Start for Life offer that a local authority will need to do in order to receive the money, and then some kind of more aspirational visions and ideas of what they might do to move beyond that minimum requirement. So today we're looking at, well, what do we already know about what works to support breastfeeding and healthy infant feeding? What do we already know about the role that children's centres and family hubs can play in doing that, and the current opportunities and challenges? And the idea behind this is really so that when we're looking at what government eventually does announce, and when local authorities are trying to think about what to do in practice, we're already learning from the fantastic work that's happened in children's centres and in the family hubs that already exist. So I'm going to stop now and hand over to Francesca and Smita to tell you about the Baby Friendly initiative and the work in children's centres.
Thanks, Sally. They were very good last-minute slides, so well done. Thanks for filling in. Right, Francesca and Smita from UNICEF, over to you. Francesca, we can see your slides. We can't hear anything yet. I think you're on mute. That's better.
On mute, of course. Somebody had to do it, didn't they? So, morning, everybody. I'm Francesca Entwistle from the UNICEF UK Baby Friendly Initiative. I'm the Deputy Director. And maybe if Smita introduce herself as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm Smita Hansels. I'm a professional lead within the Baby Friendly team.
Okay, so we're going to just start by giving those of you on the call that, because it's we're working with both the APPG for infant feeding and with the 1001 Days, just give you a little overview of what we're doing in Baby Friendly at the moment. So if I just go to the next slide, Smita. So UNICEF Baby Friendly Initiative is a global initiative. It's been going a long time, over 20 years, and was brought in back in the 80s because of a decline in breastfeeding rates worldwide. It came to the UK in 1994, and it was very much, it's a programme about training health professionals to support mothers and babies. And it was initially just introduced and is still very much globally in the hospital setting rather than broader than that. In the UK, we've extended that out to the community services, to universities, so that pre-registration midwifery and health visiting programmes have the training they need to support mothers and families. And in 2012, we did a large review of the baby friendly standards and looked at both the global and the UK evidence around, is what we're doing working? And we then also extended the programme to the neonatal care and to looking at achieving sustainability. In some areas, services have been baby friendly for a long time, and being reaccredited was getting where they'd met their ceiling. And if we were going to push it on further, we needed to do something more. So we introduced what's called our Gold Award. And you'll see some very good community services where we've got some very good case studies, actually, where they've taken it across the whole of the community, hospital, neonatal community, children's centres, university, and it's the public health leads in those services that are pioneering as guardians, that their whole community is baby friendly and supports infant feeding. The other area where we expanded the programme was that it's not in the UK, it definitely isn't just a breastfeeding programme, it's about infant feeding and relationship building. And I think that's today where Smooter will take over from me in a minute. We'll talk more about that relationship between infant feeding and the development of the relationship between the baby, the mother and the family. So if we move to the next slide, Smita. Everything we do is based on the evidence, and there's been some seminal pieces of work globally that have informed that and our theory of change, so that we're looking at, when we talk about this programme for the family hubs, it's a universal service. Baby Friendly is very much a universal service. And everything we do is based on the UNCRC, so the rights of the child. So the most vulnerable person in the room, which is the child, is put at the centre of everything we do. And recently there was, this year, there's been another seminal piece of work published by Global, WHO and UNICEF around implementation of the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes, which is there to protect both families who decide to formula feed and those who are breastfeeding from harmful commercial advertising. In 2019, the UNICEF worked with Yale University and both the Scottish, Welsh and English governments to look at a piece of work around what would work across the piece to inform infant feeding and advocacy policy, support services in the community, what's needed across all services. And it was called the Becoming Breastfeeding Friendly Project. Wales and Scotland have published their reports, and I know that the English one is due to be published soon, but it looked very much at this whole jigsaw puzzle of what is going to support families, and Baby Friendly is seen as one part of that multifaceted approach. So next slide, please, Smita. So as I said, we work with universities. We have a support network called the National Infant Feeding Network, and we work with midwifery and university health visiting lecturer leads to ensure that the programmes that these students undertake are fit for practice, so that when the health professionals qualify, they're ready to support babies, their mothers and families. We then work with maternity, health visiting services, neonatal services, and in the community we're working very much with the children's centres alongside the health visitors. By the end of this year we will have a programme piloting that will also be working with children's hospital ward settings, so those for sick children that come into the hospital setting that are sick but still young enough to need either breastfeeding or formula feeding. Okay, next slide please, Smita. So how does it work? So we work with the services so that they have to think about their policies and guidance based on the evidence. What do they look like? What are they asking the services to achieve based on NICE guidance and the evidence? They then, when they've got their policies and guidance in place, based on the baby friendly standards, they will then train their staff, and we will as a team come out and assess the staff to ensure that they are equipped with the knowledge and skills to implement the policy and guidance. We then ask them to do some internal audits of their own practice, and this is followed by further external assessments where we ask families what they perceive around the service. Was the service fit for practice? Did it meet their needs? This in turn leads to better outcomes for babies, their mothers and families, and of course then improved outcomes in the short and long term based on the evidence we know around what helps both breastfeeding, infant feeding and relationship building. Okay, Smita. So does it work? Does it make a difference? Well, it's really really good to hear that the government, the English government, is thinking about doing another infant feeding survey, because we haven't had any English data since 2010, so it feels very out of date. Scotland kept their infant feeding survey going, and they've got the policy that's all their maternity services and health visiting services are baby friendly, and so what we know is their multifaceted approach, including baby friendly, has seen an increase in their breastfeeding rates. As you can see, some of them quite substantial. What was really interesting about their last survey was it was not showing just an increase, but it was showing the most substantial increases and rises in mothers from deprived areas, which of course this project is also trying to achieve. And they started collecting data, interestingly, at 13 to 15 months, which had never been collected before. And they found, again, that there was 21% of toddlers still being breastfed, which, when you think about the statistics Sally just showed us, that is quite phenomenal in an area, in areas of Scotland where actually breastfeeding rates have traditionally been very low. The other really interesting trend that they're seeing is that solids are being given later. And we know that when solids are given later, then there's more likelihood that when we're going to reduce some of those long-term conditions like obesity and diabetes. So good news, really, and it's really good to have that evidence to use alongside what we're doing. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Smita now to take you through the Children's Centre side of it.
Thank you, Francesca. Right, so this is about baby friendly within children's centres specifically, and obviously children's centres have a really important role to play in improving the outcomes for young children and their families, especially as they have a particular focus on the vulnerable groups. And they're in an ideal sort of situation to work collaboratively with maternity and health visiting services and add strength to those and support the implementation of the baby friendly standards within their areas. So a lot of children's centres were already engaged with health visiting services, working to implement those standards to a basic level. And then when the standards were reviewed in 2012, a more comprehensive set of standards were developed for children's centres so that they could expand their role to support infant feeding and early relationship building as well. So these are actually the children's centre standards to provide support for pregnant women, and that could be antenatal sessions, it could be peer support, it could be lots of different ways that they do that. They also identify those in their areas that are pregnant and maybe reach out to them to let them know what is available for them, and they can do this collaboratively with maternity services. They might actually have maternity services within their centres offering antenatal support. Protecting and supporting breastfeeding, that can include having a welcoming environment for families to feed within their centres, to breastfeed within their centres. It also looks at sort of providing breastfeeding support or signposting to support within the area, support with introducing solids, and as Francesca mentioned, working within the international code of marketing, and then the close and loving relationships. And this is a really important standard, and actually this is where children's centres can really come into their own, because they're supporting all people, and whether they're coming in for feeding support or just support with within baby groups or baby massage groups or whatever support the family support early help services are offering, it's an opportunity to talk about those feeding interactions and how they support the building of relationships as well, and to promote that sort of responsiveness and being attuned to the needs of their babies. So as Francesca pointed out, the baby friendly assessment process is quite a significant one and takes quite a length of time. It involves looking at those services from the perspectives of the families that use them, and then implementing changes with audit and evaluation to check how the standards are being met. And as you can see from this diagram, it does take a number of years from when you've signed up to go through the accreditation process to when you actually are fully accredited. It can take up to about 3 years. And then it can take a couple of more years to kind of go through a re-accreditation and move towards the Achieving Sustainability Standards. Now, with the Achieving Sustainability Standards, a lot of the time they now are implemented right from the beginning. We're already starting to think about what the leadership will look like, what the culture in the organisation will look like, how they're collecting data, how they're progressing and responding to change. So that's sort of being built in at every stage as we work with services now. And also just to say that this happens very collaboratively with health visiting services primarily. So often the assessment process happens together. So children's centres and health visiting services will be assessed together, they'll plan their assessments together, the leads will work very closely together, and that's usually what makes them very successful. So this is showing you the number of services that have engaged with the process. Now we know this for health visiting. It's a little bit more difficult to know that for children's centres because children's centres are quite a different landscape across the country, and they can work in various ways. In fact, some of them are not called children's centres at all anymore. They're called they're called family centres, family hubs even. They're moving to that model. And some places don't have children's centres, and some are known by the local facilities, the local buildings and things like that. So parents know where they're going, but they don't really recognise it as that service. 91% of health visiting services have engaged with Baby Friendly and are on the accreditation process. And here you can see how many are at each stage. The overdue follow-up, that usually means that, especially during COVID, we've had a number of services that have really struggled due to staffing and just the changes they've had to implement, not being able to offer face-to-face support, having to close certain centres and so on. So they are now being followed up to kind of be supported to continue with that baby-friendly journey. There are several that are already fully accredited. So the blue is obviously the health visiting services, and the pink is the children's centres. And that doesn't mean that there are fewer children's centres engaged. As I said earlier, a lot of them are actually just supporting the health visiting service and kind of moving through that together. And the pink shows the ones that are trying to implement the sort of more extended version for the children's centre standards in their own right. So they're going for them in their own right. And as you can see, 3 services have already achieved gold accreditation and have implemented all sorts of initiatives to support their local families. And here are a few examples of those. So you can see, I mean, the ones that work really well are the ones that have really good collaborative partnership working with health visiting and maternity. That includes really good data sharing. It includes having their centres as a hub where lots of services work together, and good referral processes in and out of services and good signposting. Some places have introduced dashboards so they can track what's happening with infant feeding that are shared at board level and discussed. And then some of them have already implemented a best starting life strategy and looking at how they can put these, what was put together in the review, how they can start to implement that. And sometimes this works alongside early help strategies, which are wider. And as the family hubs are actually for 0 to 19 and maybe older, if they're undersend, families, whereas the best starting life strategies are usually for the early years, and how those two work together and how they start to evolve moving forward, and maybe how they overlap or work together in those strategies is all kind of stuff that we're seeing happening as we go into services currently. We also know that there are community maternity hubs in some areas as well, which are slightly separate, but again, there are opportunities there as some of them work within children's centres to kind of look at how they move forward together. And you can see some other examples there of things that are in place in the antenatal and postnatal period. And there's a big emphasis also on parents' well-being, emotional health and well-being as well, which is also linked to any feeding difficulties they might be having, and so they can be referred for support. So what's unique about children's centres, and what are the unique opportunities for children's centres? one of the things that we know is that breastfeeding is not just about a method of feeding. It's not just about food and nutrition. You know, the amount of interaction and holding baby that involves, it is a unique opportunity to start to build those early relationships. And often what we find initially in services is that breastfeeding and health outcomes, you know, they sort of are linked, and breastfeeding is seen in people's minds as something firmly under health and health outcomes, and not always associated with early attachment, attainment, school readiness, some of the other impacts that it can also have. And within children's centres, because people are not primarily coming for feeding support, but they're coming for a range of services, it's a unique opportunity to bring into those conversations opportunistically how that sort of relationship building works within that interaction in the feeding relationship. And that's a really amazing thing. So if you know, when a baby's breastfed and there's a release of the hormone oxytocin that releases the milk, that also helps to build the brain connections. So it's kind of helping parents to understand that it's okay. Breastfeeding is also a cuddle. It's also, you can't spoil your baby, you can't breastfeed them too much. And all of those messages can happen in the context of not only when they're coming for feeding support, but for any kind of parenting support that is being given out. And one of the challenges we have, obviously, is that the UK is a bottle feeding culture, and there are lots of families that are bottle feeding, not always because they wanted to, but sometimes because breastfeeding hasn't worked in the way they wanted to. They haven't been able to realise their goals, and so there are a lot of families that do bottle feed. And centres in that kind of standard for building close and loving relationships can also support these families to see those times of bottle feeding as times for interaction and building that special time with baby to build that special relationship with them, and how that works. And it can't work in the same way in terms of, you wouldn't just feed a baby to comfort them, for example, but then how do you bottle feed so that you use those times that the parents are primarily the main feeders, they're using those times to build relationship, they're pacing those feeds. So as Sally said earlier about the risk of obesity and overfeeding, how you can minimize that. And so the training for the staff will include some of these key messages and how they can support parents to see feeding times as special times of interaction. And then just to finish off, if we think back to all that we've learned through COVID, through the pandemic, we had the Really Good Babies in Lockdown report that showed that 28% of those that breastfed didn't feel they had the support that they needed, and over half of those that were using formula hadn't intended to, hadn't started to, and the sort of the mental emotional impact of some of that as well. And then the Best Start for Life review, as Sally mentioned earlier, actually heard from a lot of parents about the positive impact that breastfeeding can have on confidence and self-esteem. And so as she said, they were sort of recommending that breastfeeding support groups and peer networks are part of the norm. And actually a lot of these are often within children's centres. So even though children's centres might not offer the technical specialist breastfeeding support, they're usually a place where they can meet with other peers who are also breastfeeding, because we know that if they're meeting with peers who are breastfeeding, they're likely to breastfeed for longer and they'll feel supported. So children's centres really do have a very critical role in sort of making a success of this strategy and in the baby-friendly standards. Thank you, that's me done.
Smita, Francesca, thank you very much. A very comprehensive introduction to this morning. I presume those slides we can make available again through the PIF website afterwards. That would be really helpful. Thank you very much for that. There are some questions already appearing. We'll come back to those after we've had all the presentations. So if we can go on now to, we've got Chloe Way from Tower Hamlets Breastfeeding Network, and also Melissa Nugent from the Family Hub at Doncaster. And they're both involved in delivering and overseeing breastfeeding support in local family hubs, so you can see what it looks like in practice. And Chloe's also from the national charity, the Breastfeeding Network, and can share what's happening in other London boroughs as well. Chloe, are you going first?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Over to you.
Thank you. I will just share screen. Okay, can everyone see
Yeah,
that?
we can see that. That's good.
Right, thank you. Let me just step back. Sorry, we've come in the middle of the screen. Sorry. Sorry, I'm just gonna. Okay, sorry. So I'm the service manager for Tower Hamlets. I'm actually quite new in the role. I only started in December. So a lot of what I'm talking about is about the history that has gone before. But I did start my peer supporting volunteering in Tower Hamlets. So it was charity was founded in 1997 with a focus on training breastfeeding peer supporters. Our CEO is Shireen Fisher. There's a central team of part-time staff managed by our chief executive, and almost all of our staff, our small staff team, work part-time and from home, but we also have office premises in Paisley. And then just as we in our services across the country, they're mainly part-time. So people might work just for a couple of hours to run a drop-in session. Our values are at the heart of what we do. We always strive to listen actively, keep a mum or parent at the children's centre, respect a parent and support their choices, share the evidence to inform early parenting choices. We will strive never to advocate a particular lifestyle, judge a parent for the choices they make, accept money from companies that have a commercial interest in infant feeding, charge a parent for any of our support services, and charge parents who are looking to volunteer for the charity for training. We're empowering mothers to breastfeed for as long as they choose, particularly in areas of disadvantage and or where the rates of breastfeeding are low. This is a snapshot of where we're working at the moment across the country. Just quickly to go through the goals of what we're trying to achieve. Mothers may come in when they first seek support with us lacking information to support them in making choices about breastfeeding. We hope to signpost to evidence-based information. Mothers might lack a positive attitude to breastfeeding, and we use a network to inspire, share experiences, and then learn from these experiences. Mothers might lack confidence in breastfeeding. We listen to and value the mum. They can make their own choices. So what's in a name? There are over the years, there have been different names. There are currently lots of different names for the work that we do: support worker, counsellor, practitioner, helper, supporter. The breastfeeding element to our charity's name is within the title, but volunteers and workers across the sector support women through all feeding choices: breast, bottle, mixed feeding, and on to starting solids. So really, we're talking about infant feeding rather than just breastfeeding. It's the whole journey. Whatever title we answer to, we will always have started from the position of a peer supporter. So we will have breastfed at least one of our own children. So we will have walked in their shoes, and now we walk beside them on their new parenting journey. So a quick snapshot of how mums might experience support with us. So before they come to us, they maybe have used words like desperate, struggling, in pain, told I wasn't able to breastfeed. But afterwards, they will be using words like happy, have a sense of achievement, empowered, and informed. Across all the charities who provide this service, we are working towards supporting parents start that ongoing responsive relationship, responding to the child and tuning into their needs, which is very much what Smita was just talking about happening at the children's centres. And it's an important part of the first 1001 day journey. Our helper calls began in 1998, so very soon after the establishment of the charity. They quickly established this training model, and it has evolved into the two main volunteering courses we have today. In most cases, in each area we are commissioned in, part of the commission will involve the regular training of volunteers, and often this will happen yearly. We require each volunteer to commit to at least 6 months of volunteering with us. The first tier of volunteer training takes the form of a 12-week course for 3 hours once a week. This enables you to volunteer alongside a health professional or with a BFN supporter. Volunteering in drop-in sessions or on a hospital ward. To carry on volunteering with the BFN, you need to volunteer with us weekly or bi-weekly and attend yearly ongoing training and monthly 2-hour supervision sessions. So I think you can see from this, it's quite a commitment to, you have to really want to volunteer, but there is so much passion amongst mums that they will come on board with us. So a smaller number of trained helpers will then go on to complete the supporter course. Once they've completed this, they'll be able to run the drop-in sessions themselves and answer calls on the National Breastfeeding Helpline. Again, each volunteer supporter needs to attend ongoing training, supervision, and take ideally 1 call a week on the National Breastfeeding Helpline. So the opportunities and challenges with volunteering are it requires a high level of commitment from each volunteer, but it does produce a highly trained body of volunteers. But it's difficult to train if you're working full time. You can't afford to give up time to train for some parents and then donate hours on top to volunteer. This can challenge all of us in the sector when we are striving to have volunteers who reflect the community that we are serving in. So in Tower Hamlets, we are just beginning the Family Hub journey, but we've had the children's centres established for many years, definitely since the Sure Start service was begun. Infant feeding, parents will often come in for their first experience of the hub to come and attend an infant feeding session. Families build trust with us and develop that expectation with the rest of the hub's offers. We often spend much more time with parents than other professionals like health visitors or midwives. They may have a 50-minute session with the parent, but we have essentially limitless time. Parents will come back week after week for support with us. This means that we build trust with families, which is vital for the offer of the Family Hub. It means the family will then continue with us or attending the Children's Centre for support when looking to start solids, get support with sleep issues, find sessions like baby massage or stay and play, to name but a few. So just a bit about history and evolution of our service, and then I'm just going to talk about how we work today. So one of the founding members of the BFN was Joy Hastings, who alongside her volunteering for the BFN was a midwife in Tower Hamlets. Seeing that there was a gap in postnatal breastfeeding support, she started a drop-in with another midwife in 1997. Joy noticed that through her midwifery work, that although her drop-in was always well attended, it wasn't reflecting the community she was seeing at the hospital, with 60% of new mothers in Tower Hamlets from the Bangladeshi community. With the then recent creation of the Sure Start network, she was able to access more funding and started to recruit bilingual breastfeeding support workers, as they were known then, with a specific aim of making the drop-in support the whole community more effectively. Joy's bilingual support worker still works in the borough today, and indeed they've got a strong team with many bilingual support workers, and they have a Bangladeshi helpline, a Bangla helpline as well. Joy and her midwife colleagues were able to run more and more drop-in sessions across the borough, and Joy was able to tutor and train new volunteers and volunteer support workers via BFN training. Eventually, she managed the baby feeding service at the Royal London Hospital. So Currently, the baby feeding service is centred at the Royal London Hospital. Our commission with BFN is a co-commission with the Public Health Tower Hamlets. So Breastfeeding Network do the volunteer part of it, but the baby feeding services work on the ward and are based in the hospital. They work 7 days a week. They make phone calls to all new mothers. They do home visits to all parents that request them, and they work at drop-ins and virtual drop-ins and antenatal courses. And it became UNICEF Baby Friendly accredited in 2012. For the Breastfeeding Network, we run or volunteer at the drop-in. So we do the same drop-ins that the baby feeding service do, but sometimes we will be running those, or are more likely to be running those on our own. We volunteer at the maternity ward at the Royal London, again supporting the baby feeding service, and we run and support virtual workshops. We train new volunteers once or twice per year, and we provide supervision for volunteers and workers. So it's very much about the two services working together, although they're provided by different stakeholders. So Joy Hastings retired as a baby feeding service manager in 2020, but she's still a BFN tutor and volunteer. Her, I think very much from what she learned in her time in the role and her big body of experience, was that it's the integration that is key. And I think that came up earlier in the UNICEF talk earlier on, baby friendly talk earlier on. Just to clarify that over the years, the breastfeeding rates in Tower Hamlets went from 23% of new mothers breastfeeded at 6 weeks in 1999 to 81.6% of new mothers breastfeeding at 6 weeks in 2019. Sorry, I've got the 2019, it says 2020 on here, average of breastfeeding rates in England is 55%. So it's way above the national average. I'm going to just chat through some of our other services that we run in neighbouring boroughs to Tower Hamlets. They're very different models, but I just wanted to talk you through a couple of ways that the commissioning works and what those different services might look like. So Hackney is a smaller service than Tower Hamlets. It just has 2 drop-in sessions a week that are commissioned by the children's centres or the family hubs themselves. Historically, we have had a bigger service here, and we also have a support work still going on with the Orthodox Jewish community in Hackney, and that is not funded by anyone. It's purely now run by volunteers who worked with us previously. Lambeth is is bigger than our Tower Hamlets breastfeeding network service. It's co-commissioned by LEAP, which are funded by the National Lottery and Lambeth Council. It provides phone calls to all new mothers. It has specialised LEAP care for higher needs wards, so all families in those wards will get this care. It means they're supported through pregnancy and are followed up after birth. For everybody in the borough, they receive can go to 4 drop-ins a week. The service has 7 staff plus volunteers, and higher needs cases are referred back to a hospital team. So it has it's a system integrated like the Tower Hamlets one, so with BFN and help infant feeding team in the hospitals in that area. Islington has a service commissioned by Bright Start Islington Health Visiting Service, who themselves come under the Whittington NHS Trust. They have workers on the ward and volunteers on the ward. They do home visits. They run 8 drop-ins a week. They have 3 full-time staff plus part-time staff and 22 volunteers. And all these services bar Hackney train volunteers at least once a year. So future challenges for volunteering. Infant feeding support straddles midwifery and public health. It is delivered antenatally until the child is fully weaned, which the World Health Organization lists as being between 2 and 7 years old. Midwifery and public health need to be aligned in outlook for infant feeding to be effectively delivered. The examples looked at today with you have different models. They all have different funding and commissioning. This localism should ensure that it meets its local community's needs. However, this can lead to some families not being able to get the same level of care as people in neighbouring areas. And I would just leave you with the voices of some of the families that have used our services. A quick survey here, 73% felt that they were listened to when they came to one of our sessions. 60% said it felt like mums were at the centre. 71% felt respected. 67% felt the choices they were making were respected, and 62% felt they weren't pressured into any particular route. And I'll just leave you there with some quotes from mums who have used our services. Thank you.
Chloe, thank you very much. Again, some really interesting information and stats there, and a very successful service by the looks of it. There's more questions occurring. We're going to leave those to the end. I'm trying to keep track of which questions are going to be aimed at who. Can we move on to Melissa from Doncaster now? Melissa.
Hi. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what the service looks like at the moment in Doncaster in terms of feeding support. So I'm one of the locality family hub managers within Doncaster, and so just tell you a little bit about what's happening. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I just thought it'd be helpful to kind of see a little bit of context really in terms of Doncaster. The family hubs were rebranded and relaunched in 2016, and we actually have 12 hubs working across 4 localities. But whilst we have those 12 buildings, we obviously use lots of other buildings and spaces to offer that wider support, particularly in communities where we don't have a family hub. It's really useful to use as many different spaces as we can. So next slide, please. So this is a really useful tool for us. We use this with our partners a lot to kind of explain what the offer looks like. So it's about that integrated offer and how that all comes under that family hub umbrella. And obviously there's key elements of this that we deliver directly as a team, but there are also lots of other partners that help us to deliver this really rich offer. And like lots of family hubs, we look right from the beginning. So we work with families right through from pre-birth right through to 18 years, and obviously up to 24 years if you know, there's a send element with that family. Okay. So the service offer, in terms of our team, we're made up from a very unique title. It's an early years development worker title, which I'm not sure really shows the full mix now of what our staff team offer, but that's the title that we're working with at the moment. And the main focus for our particular staffing team is around that 1001 critical days, and really connecting with families during that time. And then the wider offer tends to be sort of, as the children get older, we look at different elements and kind of how we bring that in within communities and what partners we need to sort of offer that. And there's just a couple of points on there on some additional parts that we felt have really enhanced that offer, particularly starting those relationships really early with parents. So we're thinking about, we talk about introduction to family hub, that just gives us a little bit of flexibility in terms of going out, meeting families, you know, and sort of encouraging families to come into services. And a new role that we've had over the last couple of years is the parent engagement workers, and they work really strongly looking at those wider elements for families. So looking at what we call in the Stronger Families agenda, and working families to sort of support around those areas. Just thought it'd be really useful to kind of see the setup for us in Doncaster. Okay. So thinking particularly about breastfeeding in Doncaster and in our family hubs. In terms of the breastfeeding rates in Doncaster, it's a very similar picture to what's been described earlier, except unfortunately we're even lower really. So we recognise that we have always had quite low rates in Doncaster, and this is very much cultural. So this has formed our starting point for our work really around breastfeeding and around our family hubs. So over the past 5 years, if we look at rates for babies that are being fed at 6 to 8 weeks, we are looking at around sort of 30 to 35%, and we haven't really changed around that. I will say that a challenge for us is up-to-date data, and that's something we would really be keen to start to be able to access a little bit more readily. That we know that this is a significant drop from the first feed data. We look at, I would say, around 50% drop. So we need to understand more around that, and I'm sure that it will again follow some of the trends that have been described around what's been happening during lockdown as well. So there's a lot of work to do certainly in Doncaster. We are pleased to be one of the 75 authorities that are eligible for the Start for Life and Family Hubs programme. So we're really keen that this will support us in our journey to improve breastfeeding across Doncaster. In terms of strong partnerships, we've got a joint commitment with public health, and we work really closely to work on our baby friendly initiative. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but we also work really closely with public health, thinking about ensuring parents have the information and access to resources to be able to make an informed choice about how to feed their baby. And then we've also got really close relationships with maternity, especially because our midwives are based in family hubs. So that works really well for us. And then we have lots of joint partnership working with health, as described earlier when we're looking at children's centres and how we work with health teams. We have a lot of joint delivery with health. So thinking about infant massage, we have staff trained, and we kind of take it in turns to do that delivery. And we have lots of other bits and pieces that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So in terms of our children's centre BFI journey, we have successfully gained our stage 1 and stage 2 accreditation, and we really recognise that this is a really key part of the support offered in Doncaster Family Hubs. This provides us with a really strong framework for the work that we do, and I would say that the stage 1 and stage 2 accreditation has really embedded that ethos across the hubs. And what it ensures is that we have a really consistent offer. And I think particularly because we have, I'm sure like lots of local authorities, we have lots of variations with, how our communities look. It's really important for us that we're able to offer that consistency. But obviously, we tweak that as well, depending on what's needed for a community. So thinking about our next, just to mention about the training, because I know we talked about the training earlier, and again that is so key to the offer in Doncaster. So all of our staff are trained, so that's everybody from the caretakers of the buildings, right through to our business support and our early years staff. And obviously that training changes depending on which level is sort of best for anything from a level 1 to a level 3, depending on role. So yes, our stage 3 journey did start prior to the pandemic, and we were all really excited and confident about where we were heading. And then, like everybody, it's kind of stopped us in our tracks a little bit. I think that the significant impact on our work is, again, as was described earlier, is that numbers, is just seeing those face-to-face contacts with families. We are slowly starting to get there now, you know, that is improving, and we are luckily finding parents are really keen to get back. So that's really positive. I think some of the restrictions in terms of the numbers we've been able to have in groups, particularly for our health partners, has been a little bit of a barrier, really, because there've been such small numbers compared to the numbers of parents we would normally expect to see. So we're just at the point now where we're starting to, we have started our internal audits, and we're just starting to look at the findings from those and sort of improve practice and make changes where we need to. So hopefully we're back on track now with our stage 3. I have popped in there about a new project that's been trialled in Doncaster. It's called Early Days, and it's a 1,001 day project. It's just in 2 parts of Doncaster, and they are with 2 very different communities. So, you know, it is really, really interesting. But as part of that project, there's a really strong emphasis on a key worker role and having key contacts during a set time. And in terms of the feeding support, it's really felt that the 48-hour post-discharge feeding contact is the most successful, really. And that's because we have that ability to check in and to provide, you know, that support where needed, or just that sort of general check-in, really. And I think that, you know, having that relationship prior to you know, having baby has been the real key, really, for how successful that work is. So I just wanted to sort of kind of mention that, really. Okay, next slide, please. So this gives you now a bit of a view of what we're looking at in terms of support in family hubs. As I nodded to earlier, we do have midwives in all our hubs. So we will expect to see the majority of expectant parents within the family hub. Some areas still don't have that, so, you know, they might be using other buildings or the health buildings. So there are, you know, slight gaps, but overall now we've got most midwife appointments happening in family hubs, which has been a real success, and particularly over the pandemic, because we protected those buildings to make sure that the midwife appointments could solely take place there, and that expectant parents didn't need to go to hospital. And we feel that as family hubs, this is a really important part of that initial contact and that journey that we have with families. So something that's worked really well is the meet and greets. So what happens is, because most of our reception areas are, you know, within the sort of the ability to be able to chat with business support, they take that opportunity to really engage parents in conversations, and that really starts that relationship building in terms of that, you know, that really that really good start. And then to complement that, we've introduced something called welcome bags. And this is something that we've worked with Public Health, and they've actually supported us in providing these bags. And so what happens is there's specific information that in there aimed at expectant parents, and this includes materials that support the feeding journey. And so we're monitoring that and looking to see some feedback around that now that we're seeing families back in buildings. But it just provides a really good sort of starting point for having those conversations, really. Obviously, we have breast start groups, which are run by our health partners, and they continue to be you know, really important in the family hub offer. I won't go into all the detail of the first baby groups that we have, but just to kind of give you a bit of a flavour, we have something that's called First Friends that we jointly run with our health partners. And we've been running that over a number of years now, and again, very, very successful. And I think that joint partnership is a real success story. So in terms of other groups, we kind of very much tweak those to the community. And again, I think that's really important. While we have an overall offer of, these are baby groups and this is what we would expect to see, we very much communicate with our parents, talk to them about what they want and what they need, and those services are developed accordingly. But basically, all these groups offer an opportunity for relationship building, and those important conversations during those early days. And so, those services provide a journey, and what we're able to do is we're able to move those parents on to the next stage and keep in contact with them and see them at the next part for their child's journey. And obviously we're offering support throughout that time, around feeding and in any information they need. I wanted to pop this on around signposting and specific breastfeeding support, because again, I think this is something that we have realised, particularly during the pandemic, is a real strength for family hubs. And so it's that ability to be able to have general information and guidance through various ways. So whether that's through social media, we have telephone contact, we have a live chat function, which is on our Family Hub website, and of course we have face-to-face contact. And I think having BFI level 3 trained staff and infant feeding champions, so we're able to offer that additional support, is really, really important. And we do have parents that just drop in and just want to just pick up the phone, and we're able to kind of have those conversations and see what they need from us, really. But of course, then we also importantly have referral pathways in place for that additional support. So then we link in with health visiting team and our midwives, accordingly. So just the last point about parents, oh sorry, I've missed out my welcoming spaces on that. This has already been discussed, and it's that general feeling around those buildings being really welcoming. And in terms of, BFI, that's a really important position for us to be able to follow those standards. And so we found that really useful in terms of sort of making sure those spaces are really welcoming. And something we also have in Doncaster is that we support our mums scheme. And this is about a local scheme that supports mums to breastfeed out and about in Doncaster. And I know that particularly during COVID, Public Health have worked, really closely taking feedback around, the challenges that some expectant parents particularly have found around gaining that confidence and thinking about how, they might feed, particularly when, you couldn't sit down in places, and so that's been a really important way to communicate with our parents. So all the family hubs are part of that scheme, and we're recognised as being, a welcoming space within Doncaster. So in terms of parents' voice, we evaluate all our services on a regular basis, and each service is evaluated, even though they might not be specifically there to support feeding. We also then look at how have they found that experience. So all our groups are looked at in terms of that, and that informs future service delivery. Thank you. So I wanted to put this last slide up, really, and think about kind of what we're all trying to achieve. So this was sort of my closing thought, really. So ultimately, we're all trying to, we're all encouraging the development of healthy children and families, and breastfeeding is an important start in this work. So we recognise that cultural changes are needed in Doncaster, both with professionals and with families. And obviously this is what we want to do to improve the situation even further. We believe that it's all about education. And this crucially starts with young people. Ideally, we'd like to be seeing some of that in school. So parents need information before they're a parent. They need it whilst they're expectant parents, and then they need support once they become parents. So that would be kind of my vision, really, in terms of what we're trying to offer in Doncaster Family Hubs. Thank you very much.
Melissa, thank you. Again, some fantastic work going on in Doncaster then. I love all those smiley children in the in that photograph at the end, except the little girl in the front on the left-hand side who's clearly got better things to do. Anyway, very good. Right, last but not least, we've now got Kelly Pascal from the Henry service, who's the manager in Waltham Forest. And the Henry service provides a wide range of support for families from pregnancy to age 12, including workshop programs, resources, and online help, and everything from breastfeeding to nutrition and encouraging more active lifestyles. So, Kelly, over to you.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. I'm Kelly Pascal, and I'm the Henry Service Manager in Waltham Forest in East London. So my team deliver the best start with Henry Service, and we work in partnership with health and charity partners. And it's together that we provide and deliver the Waltham Forest Children and Family offer. This graphic shows some of the stages and key themes that we all know are important. And Henry has family support interventions at each of these stages, from conception up to primary school, running across the 4 nations of the UK. Today, I'm going to provide just an overview of the Henry approach to obesity prevention and the training that underpins it, before talking about how this approach has been implemented in Waltham Forest. So our work at Henry is rooted in the latest research on child obesity. Our co-founder, Professor Mary Rudolph, completed this comprehensive review of international evidence. There are 3 main findings there. Really effective practitioners are vital in helping to change family lifestyle behaviours. Support for a healthy family lifestyle needs to address all the risk areas identified in the research, and not just the obvious 2, activity and nutrition. And establishing healthy food preferences and habits from start of life should be a focus. Prevention is always better than treatment and usually more cost effective. So this is a quote from a health visitor, and it sums up a feeling that might be familiar to some of us who work with families around behaviour change. There can often be an assumption that parents are ready and motivated towards change, but parents having knowledge is one thing, and actually making changes in daily family life is what makes all the difference and what makes for success in children and family centres. To give a brief example, 5 portions of fruit and veg a day is probably the best known public health message. Yet we know nationally only about 60% of children eat 5 a day. And it's a good illustration of how having the information alone is not enough. So I'll slide through that one. So when we're thinking about how to support a healthy start in life within our children and family centres, it's helpful to think about 2 things. First is the message, all those things that make a difference on that left-hand side. So the building blocks for a happy, healthy child, but also what you might call the messenger, which is just as important as the message if we're going to make a difference in the work that we all do. So to create these conditions for change, we need to build those relationships, get alongside and really listen. And empathy, which is so powerful. One of our mantras at Henry is empathy before education. We need to work in partnership, helping families see the things that they're doing well already so they can build on them. And then we stay solution focused together, helping them think about changes they want to make, decide their own goals. So Henry offers training to health and early years practitioners, and it's very much thinking about the knowledge we need, but also about the skills and the qualities we need to help parents build confidence and motivation for making changes. We delivered this 2-day core training to our Waltham Forest partners virtually during the pandemic. And if we look at the data from 2021, it was really encouraging. Confidence increased by 91% for this group to work sensitively and effectively with families to tackle obesity issues. So crucially, training needs to help practitioners to use their skills to ask the right questions and not just to give the right answers. So we've talked about the value of training and working in partnership with families, but I'd now like to look a little closer at my local patch, Waltham Forest. Henry work in partnership with NELF Health Service and Lloyd Park Children's Charity provide an integrated partnership approach to delivering the children and family services. We deliver our services independently and by co-locating and co-delivering across the borough's 4 children and family centres. So we've talked about high quality training, and what works in our borough is a consistent and joined up approach to that training. So all staff across the 3 teams complete the Henry Core training. And this means that families are experiencing a joint approach. We make sure that early contacts are full of empathy and really count. Now, for our Henry Best Start team, training is only part of what we do. We also deliver infant feeding, healthy eating, oral health, speech and language support to families. And that provides a critical and early preventative layer of universal support within our Children and Family Centre. And together, this supports opportunities for regular conversations on those crucial Healthy Start messages. There is quite a lot to say about what's going on in Waltham Forest, so I'll limit myself and highlight a few parts, what feeds into the obesity preventions. So first contact with our infant feeding team, particularly during the pandemic, has been through the infant feeding helpline. Our team is trained to provide practical and emotional support, however baby is feeding, through phone and video calls. And this has allowed families to connect with a local practitioner for immediate support before stepping through the doors of one of our face-to-face sessions. We run 8 weekly face-to-face groups across the borough, and any resident in Waltham Forest is within a 15-minute journey to a local session. We know that families are struggling to get out the door with a new baby in tow, so we're really pleased to be opening back up walk-in sessions again, so families can come in at their own time. We want to support and protect breastfeeding in our community, and this is the bulk of the work that we do. That being said, our team is there to provide those universal messages around responsive feeding, so that all families are hearing clear and evidence-based information that helps them find the confidence to listen and learn from babies' feeding cues. And this is a critical message for early obesity prevention. Sadly, COVID has meant that for many new families, they haven't had the opportunity to physically take part in a Children and Family Centre session. We found that co-locating together with our partners is really beneficial. So, for example, a family can attend a healthy health visitors weigh-in session, and there's our infant feeding team running an infant feeding group in the same room. Our infant feeding team is also leading on the delivery and training for the baby-friendly accreditation. We achieved stage 2 in April last year with a mix of face-to-face and virtual training for all our partners. This allowed our team to extend their reach past our Henry sessions and work more widely with our partners to meet the Children's Centre standards, and as Francesca shared, to improve outcomes for mothers and babies. Our infant feeding team is an important part of a wider community of support around a family on their infant feeding journey. And looking at the recent data for breastfeeding rates, 6 to 8 week checks, Waltham Forest has a higher than average breastfeeding rate in comparison to averages in London. Moving to our Healthy Families team, just like core and baby-friendly training, Henry provides tailored training to our partners delivering early years play sessions. So in Waltham Forest, we train oral health and healthy eating champions. The champions go on to run their own play sessions, so children, parents and carers can engage in those Healthy Start messages through play. We also provide opportunities for families to get immediate support in drop-in sessions. These are often co-located with our health colleagues or out in well-known community sites like our libraries. This brief and preventative universal layer of support means that families can ask the questions they need to ask when they're ready. However, we know that in certain circumstances, an early years professional is going to identify that a family will need a little bit more support. So we offer a range of standalone workshops which provide key information, confidence building, and peer support for families. And these workshops are a great way for us to reach a large number of families in our borough and provide support on specific elements of a healthy start in life. For example, if we think about our Starting Solids workshop, evidence increasingly identifies the introduction of solid foods as a crucial moment to encourage healthy eating habits and develop healthy food preferences, which will in turn prevent obesity. Some families we work with will need more intensive support and more time. Henry Healthy Families Right from the Start is an evidence-based program which really models the approach that I talked through in our training, getting alongside parents and carers, starting with where they are and building confidence. And the program addresses the key risk factors for childhood obesity as identified in the research: parenting, emotional well-being, eating and feeding, nutrition, and physical activity. Effectively, it's a parenting approach to reducing child obesity, and families are the key agents of change at this age. So if families do not have the skills to encourage cooperative behaviour from their children and to set limits, they're never going to be able to change entrenched lifestyle habits around food. So this is a full slide. The programme explores all of the issues with families, but I just want to pull out a few things from here. We work with families to improve the emotional well-being of the whole family. Doesn't stop with the child under 5. We improve skills and strategies to hold boundaries, to not use food as a reward, to incentivize or for comfort, or to put pressure on children to eat too much. We help parents develop non-food strategies for rewarding and praising children. So there is an awful lot in our Healthy Families Right from the Start programme. And if I pull out some data from Waltham Forest Delivery in 2021, we know that the families that took part, 92% reported improved family eating habits. And there was a 94% increase in the proportion of children being active at the recommended level. So here's a little bit of an external endorsement of our work, so you know it's not just me saying this. We do know that from independent evaluation that our programme and our training that underpins it can help child obesity and reduce health inequalities. In summary, early life is absolutely critical for healthy weight across the life course. And I hope I've illustrated some of how Henry supports families to provide a healthier start in life for their children. And while there is plenty more going on in our children and family centres in Waltham Forest, I think that's all the time I will have. So thank you for listening.
Kelly, thank you very much. That's a great end to the presentations, and again, some really practical stuff going on in Waltham Forest. Right, now my brain is full. I should think everybody else's is as well, with all the information we've had from those presentations. We've got quite a few questions coming. I'll start to field those, and then if I can hand over to you in a little while, Alison, if I, to round everything up. I'm going to go through the questions that we've had submitted there in order and try and direct them at the right one. We've got a couple of questions at the beginning from Joanne. Joanne's asking, are there options for community support groups that are not associated with the NHS or children and family centres to undergo BFI training to enable a more connected care model, regardless of where families seek support from? And I think that's directed primarily at Francesca at the beginning, and then Joanne's also got in early with the questions. So she's asking if the Breastfeeding Network supporters and helpers get any formula training at all to enable full support for combi feeding parents, those needing to supplement their feeding journeys, and those who need support ending their journey. And I think that's really directed at Chloe. So can we go first to either Francesca or Smita to take that first one, and then we'll go on to Chloe. Who'd like to start?
I can start, Tim.
Francesca, thank you.
And then maybe Smita could add to it. Baby Friendly is about training the whole staff, anybody who's working in infant feeding in the service. In fact, you know, we would, when we do the assessment for the stage 2, we talk to all the staff. So it's everybody who is working with that family will undergo a random selection of them, the assessment to look at the training. So when you're planning training as a project lead for Baby Friendly, you think about training health visitors, midwives, maternity support workers, nursery nurse, doctors, peer supporters, anybody working in the service will receive the training. So it does cross over all of the services. Plus, part of Baby Friendly accreditation is asking that services reach out to other support services and other training models, as we've heard very much from the other speakers today, like the BFN and Doncaster, to ensure that we're all working together and different services are training different parts of the service to meet the needs of the families when that journey is met by the mother. So it's seamless. So I think Baby Friendly brings it together as a framework, actually, so that we can all see those outcomes together. No one person can do this on their own. It is a collaborative approach that's needed. Anything to add to that, Smita?
Yeah, as Francesca said, we do really encourage collaborative, working. And what we tend to find is that training is sort of kind of thought about together between health visiting and children's centres, and whoever's actually delivering the training, they will think about which level of training people who will engage with families will need. Melissa mentioned there are 3 levels of training in children's centres, for example, more awareness training for maybe office reception staff or people coming into the centres. There'll be training that if someone is engaging with families, how to share those key messages, and then there'll be training for those who actually provide breastfeeding support or infant feeding support. And what they usually do is think about who in the community will families engage with, and who can they invite to have that training that would benefit from that. So actually, Joanna, if you get in touch with your local infant feeding leads, either in health visiting or children's centres, wherever they're based, they'll be able to let you know what could be available for you. And we've had a really interesting initiative as well in terms of that wider working, where children's centres have worked with early years settings more widely, and thinking about the staff in those early years settings who will be future parents and how they can engage them. So there's also work to kind of change the culture more widely in that way as well. So there's some really interesting initiatives going on. So thank you for the question.
Joanne's come with a supplementary by the looks at an end at the end. My question towards BFI was more around if groups such as baby groups, church stay and plays, ABM groups, etc., that offer infant feeding support can access any BFI training.
Yeah, they could access it, and if you want to email it us actually at BFI Inquiries, we could have a conversation with her on what she's needing. We do offer different, we have many open courses, and really I want to make sure though that it's going to meet her needs. So if she wants to get in touch, that would be really, we can have that conversation.
Okay, Joanne, there's the offer. Chloe, can I come to you? If you can take the one on the formula training, and there's also a second one which I think is aimed at you from Zoe Faulkner, who's asking, who is the baby feeding service staffed by?
I might just start with that one. So that's the team at the Royal London Hospital in Tower Hamlets. The baby feeding team are staffed by many people who trained first with BFN as a volunteer, got to know the service because they're working very closely, and then became staff at the Royal London. So some people may have come from other charities, but a lot of people will have been trained through the BFN and then start working for the baby feeding service. Going back to the question about are the BFN volunteers trained in all other types of feeding? Yes, we are. I think that's what I was trying to talk about on the slide, that we're very rarely are we actually called breastfeeding service. It's nearly always infant feeding, but it's really interesting. I think when new parents come to see us and new families, they will still be using, oh, you're breastfeeding, I've come to you for support. But we're really talking about this bigger journey, the responsive parenting, and definitely we are supporting mums with all types of feeding, mixed feeding, bottle feeding, and moving into solids. So yes, we're all trained, even from the very beginning to across infant feeding.
Chloe, thank you for that. Melissa, I think you've got a load of questions which came up during your presentation. By all means, everybody else, if you want to jump in and add something, please do. So Caroline McAleese has asked, we're looking into options of setting up a breastfeeding welcome scheme in cafes and other public venues, parks, in B and NES. I'm struggling to find firm evidence of the impact of this particular intervention, although I know it's been successful in other areas. Does anyone know of any specific studies or research around how reducing barriers around breastfeeding in public has increased breastfeeding rates. Some others may like to come back on that one as well as Melissa. And then I'm going to throw the rest of them out there as well. Zoe has come back asking about Doncaster. Are you referring to both HV, Health Visitor Midwifery services, peer support services, and breastfeeding specialist services for the more complex cases? You're nodding your head, Melissa, so I'm taking that as a yes.
That's a straightforward one.
That'll be an easy
Yeah,
one,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Hannah Leonard has asked, I'd be interested to hear more about how the different services have actually implemented their breastfeeding welcome schemes. How are businesses engaged in these schemes and which staff groups used to achieve this? And finally, Patricia Wise, again for Melissa, can you give more details about the 48-hour post-birth checks, e.g. how is contact made and who provides the service? Right, Melissa, can you take all of those, please?
Yeah. So in terms of the welcome scheme, I think that it's actually our public health partners that lead on that for Doncaster. I'm sure that if I sort of check in with them and give just check permissions wise, that I would be able to provide a contact that people would be able to could pass through you, that people might be able to talk to them a little bit more about that, because that's not something that we lead on, we're just part of, so I wouldn't want to take responsibility for that one. But I'm pretty sure that Public Health in Doncaster will be really keen to to come back with some more information around that, particularly around the successes. And I'm not sure about studies in terms of what's happened, but I'm sure that again that they'll have more information on that. So that one I can sort of do a little bit more digging and get some information back to you, Sally, if that's okay. In terms of the 48-hour sort of visit that's done, it's completed. The team that's made up for the pilot is a mix of health, which includes health visiting team, that would be health visitors, community nursery nurses. We've got midwives as part of that team, and we've also got some family hub staff. So that 48 post-discharge feeding contact would be one of those key workers, but I would say primarily one of the family hub staff that are specific to that project. So I think that's mainly what was being asked for with that question, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Have I missed anything else?
Come in. If you have just a look through the remaining questions again on the Q&A, and there's a new one that's come in from Emma as well. Francesca, let me go to you whilst Melissa's looking at those.
Really good questions, and I think that's about what works to support breastfeeding is obviously what we're all about, and infant feeding. What I think Cochrane says, what the Lancet review says, what all the evidence pulls together, and they're becoming breastfeeding friendly, is you need a multifaceted approach here. And one scheme on its own is not going to change the culture in the UK that we have around infant feeding and relationship building. And so when you see everybody working together, then that's when you see results. And there's some really fabulous case studies. And I think what Doncaster are doing is admirable, that they're taking this multifaceted approach, and Tower Hamlets. And we've worked with Tower Hamlets for years, and they have seen an increase in their infant feeding, in their breastfeeding, in their support for relationships over time. But it does take time. I'd just say that in Northern Ireland, they did a really good Not Sorry Mums campaign from their government, which is lovely, about not apologising for breastfeeding in the community. Scotland has got a whole systems approach taking infant feeding forward. And so a baby welcome scheme becomes part of that and part of the evidence. And in Tayside, for example, in Scotland, they've just working towards their goal, baby friendly. So they've achieved the foundation, they've got the core in place, they've got the staff trained, they've got a baby friendly accreditation. And now, as part of their gold, they're doing returning to work, looking at what happens in the family nurse partnership pathway, looking what happens across all the services, including in cafes, in restaurants, in out and about. And so part of gold, going for gold in baby friendly, is progression. So you have to have a really secure foundation, and then you start building on that. You have a specialist pathway for women with complex needs. So you have a midwife or a health visitor supporting women with obesity or diabetes. So you meet their individual needs where they may struggle more than the average mother who maybe sails through it all. And so then you see that there's increases in breastfeeding rates at 13 to 15 months, which we're just seeing after years of collaborative working. So it's so lovely today, I think, to sit and listen to these stories where Baby Friend is providing that framework on which other people are building. Because if you don't get the foundation right, you don't get the sustainability. And you see, so I used to work in government actually, and in London as the infant feeding lead. And so what Kelly's talking about, you know, is part of this journey is if it doesn't work, it gets decommissioned and we lose that pocket of money that is being the investment. And I think with the 75 local authorities, that's what we've got to avoid this time. It's a fabulous amount of money and it needs to be strategically a good foundation and then building on that. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, quite right. Thanks, Francesca. We applaud your enthusiasm. Just before I come back to Melissa, as we haven't got everybody's direct emails, those people who, there's a follow-up questions, as Melissa particularly said. If you send an email to Sally at the Parent Infant Foundation on the address that everyone's been invited to this, and Sally can triage them and make sure you get the reply from the relevant one of our panel. Right, Melissa, can I come back to you? Zoe's asked a follow-up on who's delivering the specialist service in Doncaster. Are IBCLC lactation consultants in the skills mix? Then there's a couple of new questions from Emma about joining up infant feeding training with midwives and health visitors, etc. And a couple from Helen Gray as well about the third sector and how will the new family hubs and Start for Life offers integrate existing local third sector provision, for example. So Melissa, can you start off, and again, anybody wants to jump in, then please do. I notice particularly Kelly is getting off lightly on the questions at the moment. I think that's because hers was the most succinct and concise presentation, but do all jump in if you want to answer any of these broader topics. Melissa, back to you.
Yeah, so unfortunately, in terms of the lactation service, that's not something that you know we're able to look to in Doncaster at the moment. What we would do in terms of specialist services is we would go to our health partners and midwifery, and then obviously from there that you know their support as required. But no, it's not something unfortunately that's in place yet for Doncaster.
Okay. Anybody else want to come in on those? I've just noticed Sally has put her email address in the chat. It's sally@parentinfantfoundation.org.uk. So anybody who's got some follow-ups there, please direct them to Sally. Francesca, your hand's up again.
I can just say that as part of going for baby friendly, there has to be a specialist pathway in place. So when services go for their stage 3, for the full accreditation, there has to be a specialist pathway in place to meet those complex needs. And that I know Zoe well and Helen Gray, and that will be either supported by, it needs to be supported with the health professional or the with the knowledge and skills to do that. So either a health visitor, a midwife, or a lactation consultant, or somebody. It just needs to be somebody with those knowledge and skills to run that pathway. And as you pointed out at the beginning, Sally, about we need tongue-tie services that meet the local needs, and it isn't a postcode lottery where people get support for infant feeding, but that is part of the baby. That's part of the framework. And making sure that it exists and you do have the skilled personnel.
Thanks, Francesca. Hannah is also asking, and Kelly, this is to you, the same question as Zoe about who provides specialist feeding services in Waltham Forest.
Yeah, we have a range of staff members that we have lactation consultants leading on the baby friendly training and a number of others across training schemes. It's really important to have those in place to help lead.
Yep. Also, we've got now Joanne, who's the most prolific questioner today. Well done, Joanne, you win. How do we enable non-nurse, midwife, health visitor, IBCLCs to be able to work within the NHS? We have an amazing host of professional IBCLCs within the UK, but the large majority of them can only supply support privately, as they cannot get roles within the NHS. Who would like to take that, please?
If I can help.
Go on, Francesca, absolutely.
So I think it's about providing the knowledge and skills that the woman needs. And sometimes you do see jobs that come up within the NHS where they take on, you know, it isn't always a health professional that runs a baby friendly programme, or in particular that was very much in Tower Hamlets. They had, you know, it's been very much run by the volunteers and led by the volunteers actually. And they've created the change. And so I think as we look at a whole systems approach working together, others will be seen to come with the expertise, but you are at the behest of the organisations and the needs and the gift within the NHS. There is, as we all know, a crisis in midwifery at the moment and staffing. And I think as that, you know, an unintended consequence of that, of course, is that you need other people in the service to help support what babies their families need. So I think there will be other opportunities that come available as time goes on, and particularly in the community. What's really important is that we work together on this so that the woman gets what she needs. Just on oh, sorry, no, it's okay. I'll leave it there.
Can somebody take, there's a couple of questions and points from Helen Gray, who's asked about the third sector and how it integrates into family hubs and Start for Life. And also, will there be a universal standard that local areas should meet, like the mandation of BFI across maternity? Does anybody want to pick those up?
I mean, we have been having conversations with OHID as they've looked at the 75 local authorities, and you know, we don't, obviously none of us know how that's going to pan out at the moment, but I do think the team are looking at all the options, looking at what's needed and what works to support infant feeding, and hopefully there will be some guidance around training and providing that framework, but we don't know any of the answers yet. But so I'm sure, you know, I do get confidence it's a whole team approach here, looking at it and look what works, which is why they're not rushing into it, which feels quite, although we need some answers and we need to get going, hopefully that consultation will bring out some strong results, but who knows.
Right, I think, Alison, can I hand over to you now to bring it all together and to round up, and I'm going to duck out in a minute, but thank you very much from me to all our panelists. But Alison, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you to everybody for their contributions and presentations today. As the chair of the all-party group on infant feeding and inequalities, it's really great to hear the kind of updates of what's going on the ground and the difference that can be made for families with a consistent approach, where a service is there for a long time, where they're able to kind of really get in those communities and work alongside people. I was also struck by the very strong commitment to collaboration by all the people that gave presentations there as well. Nobody can do this on their own, and having people from all different levels of expertise, all different fields of expertise in the one place together really makes all the difference there. And I think what was also very important, what I was struck with, was the availability and breaking down barriers, because if something is in that one building that nobody feels is very accessible or feels comfortable going into, then those services could be the best in the world, but people won't feel able to access them. So I think having that availability, breaking down those barriers, that outreach, as was mentioned in Tower Hamlets, that volunteer-led, that peer-led approach, where people can work with people that they feel comfortable with in settings where they feel that are available to them, that are local to them, that are comfortable for people to go into, and then thereafter access other services too. I think that was really important. I was really struck by the way in which the services that presented today are doing that on the ground. And I think overall, I'm very pleased to see the UK government committing money to this. I think it's important. I think it's overdue. But I hope that the services will become more comprehensive over time, because there's still a postcode lottery. You're still kind of dependent on the community that you live in being lucky or not being lucky in terms of the services being provided, and on the generosity of time of volunteers who are giving their commitment to this. I think what is needed is that excellent work that's been done, the difference being made to our Hamlets moving rates from 23% to 81.6%. We see this kind of service in every community, and we really will see a change in the support that's offered to families, in the breastfeeding rates, and in also, I would imagine, if this follows through in the way that evidence would suggest it would, support given to families to tackle obesity as well, because the figures that were highlighted at the start by Sally about the obesity rates really are quite stark, and having that comprehensive support in communities where people can access it, working collaboratively across different organisations and different expertise, I think that's how we really make a difference here. And when you start to talk about it in that level of detail, 302 million, I don't know that it goes far enough. So we'll keep pushing for more money and more access across different communities. The all-party group that I chair, as well as Tim's all-party group, we will keep pushing for this because we know the importance, we see the importance of this. And we're very grateful to everybody who is working so hard on the ground to make this happen. And I thank you all very much for your contributions today. Thanks to all the people who have asked questions. I understand presentations and slides will be made available afterwards too. And for those who haven't been to the all-party group on infant feeding and inequalities, a wee plug for that too. We're going to have our AGM shortly. Please encourage your MPs to attend and to get involved in that too. Details will be forthcoming on future meetings as we set our agenda for the year ahead to looking at a whole range of different issues to do with infant feeding. So thank you all very much for your time this morning. It's really given me the best start to my day that I could possibly have, but thank you very much for your time today.